joined by Professor Anand Menon, director of the UK and a Changing Europe think tank. And well, Anand, I mean, this one should surely be about the easiest because they want us in and we want to be in.
Absolutely. I mean, you just summed it up in your rhetorical question, Evan. I mean, this is something that was foreseen under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. It's something that is a win-win for both sides. I mean, European scientists have been lobbying for the UK to be allowed in. So you're absolutely right. I think it's a salutary warning, this, that if the two sides can't reach agreement on this, then the claims you often hear about how much closer relations could get should be treated, I think, with a degree of caution. It's very, very hard to agree these things.
Yeah, well, what other things might we want to sit down and talk about? I mean, because there's firstly meant to be an enormous review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement itself, isn't there? A kind of let's take stock and see how we can improve it.
Well, let's deal with that first. There isn't an enormous review due. There is a very technical review of the functioning of what we already have. And I think here it's quite interesting that some, particularly those around Labour, who see a Labour government trying to negotiate a closer relationship, have talked up this review, whereas people on the EU side are very, very clear. This is a technical process to see whether what we've already got works. It's not about expanding it. It's not about renegotiating it. So that's the first thing, is that review is, I think, going to be far less ambitious than people here want. But, you know, if you listen to Keir Starmer, there are all sorts of ideas coming out about we'll negotiate this agreement and that agreement. And I think the Horizon case just should make us a bit wary about the fact that we might want something, but it's not necessarily the case that the European Union will want it too, or that they won't want something we can't give in return.
Yeah, I mean, what is going on in Brussels at the moment as regards this? Have they just basically stopped talking about us, moved on, put the trauma of Brexit behind them, and just really don't want to talk to the UK? Or what's your sense of what's driving this?
I mean, pretty much what you said. I don't think it's true they don't want to talk to the UK, and I think we shouldn't forget the fact that sort of personal and political relations between us and our EU counterparts are far closer than they were, for instance, under some parts of the Boris Johnson administration, but they have largely moved on. I mean, if you talk to people in Brussels, they'll say, well, we don't talk about Britain anymore. We don't talk about Brexit. We've got other things, you know, there are other challenges confronting us, whether it's migration, the relationship with China, what to do about green energy. Those are the things they're talking about, and we don't really figure.
Tell me about the one very specific thing, and you'll know it better than I do, but it was essentially about a grace period on rules about electric vehicle exports that essentially expires at the end of this year, and kind of meant, because we were all buying too many Chinese batteries, which are half the value of the car, that we were all going to have to be taxing each other's electric vehicles.
God, I'm so relieved it's a specific thing I can actually talk about. But what this was under the terms of the treaty, the two sides said until 2024, we will allow a lower proportion of locally sourced content than we ultimately aspire to. So at the start of 2024, you're meant to increase the proportion of locally made product in your electric vehicles. Now, it looks like neither side is going to meet that. And if they don't, and if the EU doesn't extend the period, where both sides are liable to pay tariffs on imports from other sides. But what's interesting about this is the UK are keen to extend the grace period. And the noises you hear from the European Commission are, well, actually, this might provide a good stick to give an incentive to car companies to get a bit quicker about getting those locally origin bits. So even though both sides might stand to suffer in the short term from tariffs, the noises from the European Commission suggest that this isn't going to be a foregone conclusion, that the EU might actually say no.
That's another really interesting one. Anand Menon, thanks so much.